so this moment, this kind of tension or navigating these differences, I observed this in different situations. This was one project example. And I think it captures what I refer to as this disciplinary in-betweenness, and especially in the context of justice and accountability for atrocity crimes. Open source investigations are not just this hybrid type of investigation or this new way of using media and technologies, but they really require actors, all these different type of actors, to constantly navigate between these different professional logics and norms and expectations. And this quote by one of my interview respondents also captures this tension. And so this one practitioner I interviewed said, well, in describing their organization, we're not really journalistic, we're not really human rights fact-finding, but we are somewhere in between. And that sense of in-betweenness is what I'm going to explore today. So just to backtrack, what am I talking about? And what is the relevance what is the link with, open source investigations, journalism, and justice and accountability? So over the past decades, open source investigations, which I refer to as OT, have become a crucial part in efforts to achieve justice and accountability for atrocity crimes. And what we can really see is that it's become a field that has professionalized, institutionalized, developing from these informal online practices to formalized open source investigation organizations, also being adopted and adapted within existing organizations, whether that's journalism or human rights NGOs. And this kind of merging of practices and focus also on the legal usability have kind of led to these hybrid organizations, or organizations carrying out both public-facing journalism and activism type of work, as well as non-public facing legal case building, with organizations trying to balance those different roles sometimes as well. And so my research looks at this field, these different actors involved in the fields. What are their logics? What are their roles within this network dynamic? And so this is a criminological approach to networked justice. For those unfamiliar, criminology is the study of crime, its causes, its effects, different types of crimes, and also the responses to crime. So my research really focuses on the responses to these atrocity crimes. And so in my research, I'm interested in how justice is produced through networks of public and private actors, and how open source investigations in particular have become part of these international accountability infrastructures. And so a question kind of central today is also, how do these hybrid roles, both justice and accountability versus journalism versus activism, relate to wanting to achieve these justice outcomes? Very briefly about my research, just so you have a background of what I've been doing and what I'm talking about today. So what I'm basing my findings on. So to understand how this field operates in practice, I conducted interviews, 35 practitioners across the globe. Lots of different people, from purely journalism outlets to kind of semi-hybrid organizations, specialized open source organizations, traditional kind of old school human rights NGOs who have taken up open source investigations within their work, and also people from legal institutions and criminal investigators who are wanting to use this for legal accountability, and who also increasingly have contact or receive information from these different type of private or civil society actors. And so this research and observations also within different organizations, network meetings, workshops, training activities, etc., have led to a mapping. This is a very preliminary kind of visualization I'm going to show. And this is kind of how I've been looking at this open source investigation like ecosystem in the justice and accountability sphere. This is I'm really practicing with this visualization. So if anyone is really good at data visualization, let me know. But what I've tried to show here is how there's like these different organizations and collaborations and practices across the OT field. So different type of organizations are collaborating. Those are the orangey kind of color. Information is shared often one way when it's involving public prosecutors or criminal investigators, for example. And then other factors and actors that influence the field are kind of mentioned in the corners. They're not necessarily included in my talk today. They're part of my broader PhD research, but they do also shape the field, because what are their role and how do they relate to open source investigations and justice and accountability? But as you can see, it's a diverse field with lots of different backgrounds. This is not even saying the different disciplinary backgrounds, whether it's architecture, data science, sociology, you name it. Like there's lots and lots of different people with lots of different expertise within this field as well. Next slide. And so what I've found and what really shapes the open source investigation field, and I'm not the first one to say this, but it's a really multidisciplinary practice. And it's this strength of these combining logics and practices that have really kind of made the field what it is at the moment. It seems also that open source investigations really thrive at these disciplinary boundaries, and that also these practices have emerged precisely from the merging of these various disciplines. One respondent said, well, it's like true innovation and creation of knowledge is really happening at the boundaries of where these people are working and the different expertise and logics and ways of working that they bring to the open source field. And it's described by quite a lot of different respondents as putting a puzzle together, where not only are open source investigators really enthusiastic about this puzzling, because that's what open source investigation oftentimes is, but also that all of these different disciplines are like a piece in the larger open source investigations puzzle, where lawyers have really strengthened like evidentiary thinking of legal standards and a structured way of working. Journalists have strengthened verification processes, use of storytelling also to present results. And then technologists or tool developers are enabling analysis, for example, or visualization practices. And then another key theme that really comes out of my fieldwork is this cross-pollination of practices through field mobility. So lots of different individuals I spoke to have shifted from maybe academia to journalism organizations, or people working for specialized open source investigations have previous experience within policing organizations. And so there's this cross-pollination of practices that has helped this knowledge diffuse, be created, and also help the field to become institutionalized, where knowledge is like shared and adapted. And then also this multidisciplinary field, the nature of the field means that practitioners that have these different backgrounds and maybe possess more than one type of skills or disciplinary training are able to code switch easier and are perceived as like almost these unicorns with unique skills. And it's positioned themselves quite strongly within the field. This is something that people working in open source consultancy, for example, who work within different type of organizations and bring their expertise and knowledge to those organizations as well, have reported on. Made me think of what Johanna actually just said about experts and who is expert within open source investigation. So maybe we can talk a bit about that in a minute as well. But all of these things are really interesting and have made the field develop into what it is. That hasn't been frictionless, and different tensions can be, have emerged also when these different actors, different organizations with these different logics try to work together. And so different tensions have formed that have also forced the field to react to those. And adapt in a way that more hybrid practices emerge. because yeah, they introduce competing logics and practices. So one example is referring to language and contextual awareness. So the example I described at the beginning about, well, what kind of language is used? Do we call this evidence? It's not only about the contextual meaning or the legal analyses, but it's also about the words used when publishing about this. So for example, one respondent who works a lot with these different type of people, so with journalists and activists and legal analysts, say, well, the journalist will call everything evidence, but the lawyers will panic because they'll say, no, this is information. Evidence is something that proves for a court that this specific crime has been committed and that it adheres to these legal standards. But yeah, if you're doing a journalism type of output, it might not matter really as much whether you call it evidence or not, because it can be evidence, but not just in the legal sense. So those things complicate things when trying to agree on publishing outputs and language used. And then another thing that I observed relation with kind of language and contextual awareness is really kind of criticism about the at a distant nature of OC. So due to a lack of contextual knowledge and atrocities being investigated, and this really particularly relates to the early days of OC, where practitioners I spoke to were kind of critical about these informal communities online, or of people that what they call cowboy OSINTs, trying to do stuff, innovating really quickly, but also not really thinking about the consequences or the context that they were investigating, which, if you're looking into atrocity crimes, are particularly legally and politically sensitive, often lots of groups of victims, and yeah, contextual awareness is needed also when doing this type of investigation. And that also caused friction sometimes, where practitioners would kind of see it as a cool game and this cool piecing their puzzles, rather than thinking of the real life consequences for people on the ground who are dealing with these atrocities also in their day-to-day life. And so multidisciplinary, this is another interesting quote by a respondent, where yeah, these multidisciplinary collaborations are really interesting, but they may also have competing incentives. So it's not only language, but it's also describing these frictions that are due to working on different type of timelines, working with different kind of goals, project outlooks, and also organizational agendas. And some general findings related to these incentives are that, for example, organizations had to overcome kind of initial feelings of competition. Again, this is specifically in the early days of OSINT or OC, where researchers felt that sometimes organizations were quite territorial, both about the data that they had found, but also about investigative innovations, and wanting to kind of keep their cards close to their chest so that they could publish breaking news. On the other hand, transparency and collaboration has also always been central to open source investigations. But there's definitely at the beginning, respondents found that, people were still trying to be the first to publish and to get this breaking news. And that sometimes led to tensions working when wanting to collaborate, and also making sure that people aren't doing the same thing and there's no over documentation, for example, in relation to atrocities. And another tension that arose was these different challenges related to ideas on crediting. So, for example, one respondent described, working together with leading journalists on a case, but then after the story was published, the people who had actually done the research, like the data analysis behind the story, weren't mentioned at all in the publication, which ended up also winning different prizes and getting a lot of acknowledgement also for the quality of the work. But the invisible labor behind that wasn't done or wasn't mentioned. And it was kind of it was seen as not necessarily a problem at the time, but it definitely led to tensions afterwards and more conversations about, hey, how can people be credited in a meaningful way for the work that they've put in. Another respondent, and that's that second bit about, oh, these weirdos just have a blog, they don't deserve credit. And that relates to these informal communities at the beginning who were doing all of this really cool verification work. And lots of people were involved with, varying levels of expertise. And those ideas were translated or used also by other more established journalists, for example, in their own work and not credited. Because of the idea of them not necessarily being a credible source, or kind of early lack of acknowledgement of the expertise of these informal investigation groups. And so overall, these organizations have had to deal with these diverging investigative incentives, and then also balancing things like journalistic and legal type of impact. Are these organizations like more commercially driven? Are there funding incentives that organizations have to consider? Are they more ego-driven? Is this about getting the next Pulitzer Prize? Or is it working towards societal impact? And how can organizations make sure that they're on the same page? So that about these competing incentives. Another key theme that emerged were discussions on ethics, and specifically about transparency. As I said, transparency being one of like the core values of open source investigations. And even though it's celebrated as this core value, early days there were these clashes also due to security concerns and diverging logics about what transparency actually means. So when talking about transparency, some respondents say, well, working with journalists, they'd say, hey, this is really good. We need to share all of this information. It also makes us credible, believable, and also people can replicate our investigation. Like they don't have to believe us. They can also just do it for themselves and see that we've taken the right steps. But legal practitioners were more hesitant. They would say also want to keep cards close to the chest, which if you're a lawyer, you don't always share all of your information. But also specifically for the atrocity crimes context, full transparency could also potentially endanger people who were depicted in videos. It could lead to the identification of the person who filmed the footage. And so as when respondents said, well, full transparency is just going to get people killed. We have to really think critically about what we're doing and what our position and responsibility is in this field. And so this quote by respondent says, well, what happens when we expose them? And we have to constantly make these security and privacy decisions for other people remotely. So we have a lot of avenues for harm. And this is something that you can kind of see over the last 10 years has become more central to organizations doing open source investigations in relation to atrocities, where these discussions are had. And organizations are stepping away from full transparency to kind of more selective disclosure, or not hyperlinking every single video because of potential risks that there may be for people depicted. Another issue related is the issue of sock puppets. So whether people are using fake identities online to hide their identities, and whether that's useful or not. And so, some journalism respondents said, well, we were kind of hesitant because it could potentially kind of violate journalistic codes because you're not being honest about your position as a journalist, where other people who had experience working in criminal investigations or working with this dangerous or sensitive topics knew also the dangers that completely exposing themselves could be for them also. So there's a bit of a balancing act there, which I think is really interesting. And it also just kind of shows how these different experiences really shape how people look at these issues as well. And then the fourth tension, and I think that also it kind of becomes apparent from the different tensions before this as well. But it's really kind of these tensions between these different structures and ways of working, and also kind of the output. So where journalists might want to work kind of more kind of hands-on, story needs to be put together. There may be kind of more time pressure for getting a story out. Working with legal advisors or lawyers who also want to be able to use that information for criminal case building can cause tensions if these journalists have to kind of more hold on to these legal standards and chain of custody type of procedures as well. And a legal advisor I spoke to, she recognized that some of the analysts or more journalistic type of researchers within their organization always would kind of fear the lawyer coming into the process and making sure that they adhere to all these standards. But if they also want to make some kind of legal output or impact, those are important steps to adhere to. But it does cause this tension between balancing innovation and making sure that there's also legal usability. And so looking at these tensions and these general kind of dynamics, what I've seen kind of now, because so these are kind of like the tensions I spoke to are kind of almost a decade in the making of discussions and navigating these tensions. And so what I can kind of see now of the last few years in reflecting with practitioners on where they stand now, what type of impact they want to make, is that practitioners are kind of experiencing this sense of disciplinary in-betweenness, where they're also kind of looking for which identity they have within the field, and what that also means for their role, their responsibility, and how they respond to different type of tensions. And so I can really see that practitioners are becoming like increasingly aware that it's also difficult to do everything at the same time. They're also aware of these identities and structures related to specific type of disciplines, for example, journalists. And so this quote I found really interesting, and this is from an open source investigations organization, specialized organization, where they have these kind of competing logics, and where open source investigators told me, well, we kept on having more journalists coming into the organization and managing like the editing and publishing, and that really impacted also how we work, and whether we don't work with legal practitioners or law enforcement, for example. And even though their organization is also seen as very journalistic, a lot of people hesitate to call themselves journalists because of this implication that it has, which I find really interesting. And so there's this kind of, increasingly awareness of, it's really difficult to do everything at the same time. And talking to these law enforcement respondents and criminal investigators who interact with these different organizations, it became really clear also that clear role definition is just really important for interacting with these open source information providers, to really understand their incentives and also the way of working, because then law enforcement organizations will also know how to approach the information that they're receiving and whether there may be particular issues of bias, for example. And so, so there's this kind of new realization of having to think critically about what type of organization or individual or analyst they are. And so how I see it, and this is something that I also discussed with Imar de Vries in a paper that we wrote about this in-betweenness and identities, is that there seems to be such like an awareness of these limitations that organizations are kind of doing this like boundary recalibration where they're clarifying their mandates, looking really critical at the role they want to play. And so it's not just this like simple hybridization, but there also seems to be another kind of form of divergence, and a process of like redefining roles within this justice ecosystem. where organizations might be separating the type of outcomes, whether it's legal or journalistic kind of outputs, or actually taking a step back and saying, hey, we actually want to focus 100% on journalism, or we want to focus 100% on legal case building. Or if we do continue with these hybrid practices, we have to be really critical and super clear about who is doing what and how do we firewall what people are doing within the organization. And so connected to this is this overarching, and this just makes it all the more difficult but interesting. Overarching are also these questions of like international legal justice and accountability processes and all these political legal complexities that come into play when wanting to do work in this power-fueled process of doing accountability for atrocities. And that's really, really related also to this type of like, they're producing evidence, they're producing narratives, there's questions of credibility, who's a reliable expert, who's sharing information with these law enforcement actors, for example. And as this information like circulates between these organizations and then potential legal outputs, like how is like authority and legitimacy negotiated across these networks, especially with these changes and shifts in identity and role definition. And yeah, I think that like the contexts where these legal and political sensitivities come into play just really further complicate also these investigative practices. So to round off and concludes, I think there's like three kind of key takeaways. So yeah, it seems that open source investigations has become like this hybrid investigative field. All these really interesting disciplines have come together and new ways of practice and new roles have emerged. But there's this sense of disciplinary in-betweenness that can really complicate collaborations, but also role definition. And although it creates innovation, it also can create friction. And the field has matured over this, decade, I'd say 10, 15 years of these practices and these negotiations. But there are senses of boundary recalibration and almost disciplinary humility. So what role do organizations play and how do they relate to each other? And so rather than asking maybe whether open source investigations is like only journalism or law or activist, we can ask what kind of accountability infrastructure is this helping to build, and what are the roles also for these journalistic and hybrid organizations in this context of justice and accountability for atrocities. And I'll keep it at that. I'm very much looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.